The maniac who terrorized California in the 1960s called himself Zodiac in his letters to the press, and every resident of the country with a shudder waited for the next message of a serial killer. Why the police failed to establish the identity of the Zodiac even 50 years later, and what were the motives of the criminal, deal with our material. About one of the most famous serial killers in the history of the United States for a long time was known little. For 50 years after the completion of a series of terrible crimes, police could not tell the real name of the brutal killer, nor describe his appearance, and even his pseudonym Maniac chose for himself, sending a letter to one of the newspapers in the state of California. Different ways of killing, his own mark, secret signs, and encrypted messages. The Zodiac case remained one of the most mysterious crimes in America. But on October 6, 2021, a group of private investigators announced that the identity of the maniac became known. The story of the Zodiac begins on December 20th, 1968. It was on that day that a serial killer committed his first crime and began a protracted investigation that kept all the U.S. police for many years. The first victims of the criminal were two people, a couple in love, who went on a first date to the picturesque Lake Herman in the town of Vallejo. However, the romantic evening ended tragically as soon as night fell, to the car of 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 17-year-old David Faraday approached the unknown man with a gun in his hand. The killer told the young people to leave the car, after which the Zodiac shot David and then caught up with and killed Betty. The bodies of the lovers were discovered shortly after the murder, but the police had no leads to catch the culprit. The Zodiac's next move was the murder of Darlene Ferrin and Michael Maggio, who also decided to spend time alone near Lake Herman. On July 4th, 1969, the lovers drove up to Blue Rock Springs Park and stopped by the water. At about 11 p.m., a man approached the car and shot the young people 5 times with a Luger pistol before firing 2 more test shots and fleeing the scene. The girl died immediately, while Michael, despite his injuries, managed to survive. It was this murder that led the police to believe that a serial killer was at work in the city. By that time, he had 4 victims on his account, and the similar handwriting and the weapon of the crime suggested that in both cases the same person had killed. By the way, a few hours later, the police guesses were confirmed. At about 1 a.m., the Vallejo Police Department received an anonymous call from the person on the other end of the line reporting the murder of 2 young men in a park and saying he was taking responsibility for the crime. The police immediately took action. They managed to locate the payphone from which the call was made. As it turned out, the killer made the call from outside the home of his victim, Darlene Ferrin. Also in the police station recorded conversation with the criminal, and the dispatcher later noted that the caller's speech was as if pre-prepared, and the killer himself spoke very calmly, even monotonously. However, the prompt response of the police yielded no results. The identity of the serial killer was still a mystery, and no new evidence could be found. However, on July 31st of the same year, the maniac himself decided to remind about himself. On that day, the editorial offices of 3 publications, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner, received 3 frightening messages containing information about car murders. The author of the letters, who identified himself as Zodiac, claimed to be the perpetrator of the crimes. In addition, all 3 messages contained encrypted fragments, which, according to the maniac, hid his name. The Zodiac demanded that the publications publish his letters no later than August 1st, or else he threatened to kill at least 12 people. Together with the city's police department, the newspapers decided to agree to Zodiac's terms, and on the appointed day, the city shuddered at the murderer's messages on the front pages of popular publications. 6 days later, the Zodiac sent another letter in which he wrote that he was now in control of the situation and also said he was waiting for a movie to be made about him. Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking to you. I'm back with you again. Tell Herb Cohen, American producer, I'm back. I've always been here. That Tosche San Francisco Police Department Inspector Dave Tosche is good, but he'll get tired of chasing me soon. I'm waiting for a good movie about me. Who's going to play me? I'm in control of events. Yours sincerely, the sign of the cross in a circle. Take a guess. The maniac signed his messages with an unusual sign, a small circle with a cross in it. The meaning of this signature is also still unknown, but some experts believe that this is the logo of the famous American company Zodiac, which was inspired by the killer. By the way, the police have not managed to decipher any of the 3 cryptograms that Zodiac sent with the first 3 letters, but it managed to 2 residents of the city, a math teacher, Donald Garden, and his wife, Betty. On August 8th, the couple published the transcripts of 2 of the maniac's messages, which stated that he enjoyed killing people and his victims would become his slaves in the afterlife. In the fall of that year, the Zodiac struck next near Lake Berryessa in Napa. He attacked Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard. The killer, armed with a gun and knife, informed the couple that he was an escaped convict and was going to steal their car. However, after the Zodiac tied up Brian and Cecilia, he massacred them in cold blood. The maniac then painted a circle crossed with a cross on his victim's car and fled. Brian Hartnell managed to survive, but his lover died on the way to the hospital. The police interviewed the survivor and from his words made a rough sketch of the perpetrator. A few hours after the crime, Zodiac called the police department and told them what had happened. Police were able to locate the payphone from which the call was made, but it did not help the investigation. However, the officer of the police department, Ken Narlow, who was appointed in charge of the investigation, made a psychological profile of the serial killer and described his main characteristics, among which was his attraction to water bodies. All crimes were committed near water bodies, as well as his choice of victims. Each time the criminal deliberately chose a couple who preferred to seclude themselves in their car. In addition, Narlow noted the different choice of weapons, which was uncharacteristic of the typical image of a maniac. On October 11th, 1969, the Zodiac committed his last proven murder, which this time was different from previous ones. That day, the victim of the Zodiac's crime was cab driver Paul Stein, whom the maniac shot with a Luger, stole his wallet, and cut off a small piece of his shirt. The murder was witnessed by a group of teenagers who told police officers that they saw a dark-skinned man getting out of a cab. Police combed the surrounding neighborhoods, but encountered only one passerby who did not match the witness's description. A few hours later, the police station received a call from Zodiac, who decided to mock the officers. He said that immediately after killing the cab driver, 2 policemen approached him and asked him questions about the crime, but it did not even occur to them to suspect him. As it became clear from Zodiac's words, he was wearing a mask when he left the cab driver's car, and therefore the teens mistook him for an African American in the dark. This heinous omission left the entire police force in the city in a state of shock, and the nearly caught killer lay low for a while. However, the Zodiac's silence didn't last long. A few days later, he sent a letter to the Chronicle with a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt, and revealed several details of the crime that were known only to the police. After that, the killer, between 1969 and 1974, sent about 20 more letters, including a postcard with a cryptogram, which could not be deciphered, a lengthy text of 7 pages, where the Zodiac talked about the murder of a cab driver, as well as messages confessing to another 36 murders, of which, by the way, he was not found guilty. In addition, some amateur detectives even speculated that Zodiac was not one criminal, but a whole group of killers who were probably members of some sect. A little later, one of the researchers put forward a version that Zodiac was a member of the sect family, the founder of which was Charles Manson. Unfortunately, all put forward versions were not valid, and many years later the brutal killer was not caught. All the evidence found and surviving witnesses did not help the police to move forward in the investigation of a high-profile case. Perhaps it was due to the lack of modern technology at the time, and perhaps due to the criminal talent of the criminal himself. After 1974, the letters from the Zodiac stopped coming, but the investigation continued for many more years, and in some U.S. counties the case is still open. Suspects included rapist Arthur Lee Allen, George Russell Tucker, Louis Joseph Myers, Jack Terrence, and George Hodel, the father of Detective Steve Hodel. who suspected his father of an equally high-profile crime, the Black Dahlia murder, and later claimed that Hodel Saar might well have been the Zodiac. Until yesterday, one of the most high-profile cases in American history was considered unsolved according to police. It's still open in Napa County, but on October 6th, a group made up of journalists, criminologists, and former detectives who call themselves the Case Breakers announced that the maniac had finally been named. According to community members, Gary Francis Post, a house painter, was hiding under the Zodiac mask. Notably, the alleged case solving was led to an investigation into the death of a victim not previously linked to the Zodiac personality. We're talking about Sherry Jo Bates, who was murdered in 1966 in Riverside. Her killer was never found, but evidence left at the crime scene led the case breakers to believe that the girl died at the hands of one of the most wanted criminals in the United States. The thing is that near the victim's body were found a watch, smeared with paint, as well as a characteristic boot print, which had previously been found near other victims of the Zodiac. Digging a little deeper, the group found out that not far from the crime scene there was a hospital, to which a man named Gary Francis Post was sent after a gunshot wound the very day when the murder of Sherry Jo Bates was committed. After comparing other evidence, community members searched the home of the alleged maniac, who, by the way, passed away in 2018, and found photos in his home, which clearly show scars that match the scars on the Zodiac sketch. Also in favor of the fact that it was Gary Francis Post hiding under the mask of an elusive maniac, said the watch found at the scene of the murder of Sherry Jo Bates they were smeared with paint, and Post worked all his life as a painter and a boot print. The fact is that a number of forensic experts previously claimed that the Zodiac's shoes resembled army boots. As it turns out, Gary Francis Post was an Air Force veteran and may well have had a similar pair of shoes. After discovering the evidence, the team spoke to the alleged killer's neighbors, although none of them were able to confirm or deny the case-breaker's version of the story. One local resident noted that Post always seemed strange to her and led a double life. At the moment, the FBI refrains from commenting, indicating that the case is still open, but most of those who have followed the investigation are confident the participants of the case breakers managed to make a huge step forward, and soon, in the case of one of the most gruesome maniacs in the US, will be put to rest.